What's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today I want to talk for a little bit about the New Orleans Pelicans. Right now, if you take a look at the Western Conference standings, it is a bloodbath out there. We've got amazing teams all up and down from 1 till 10, and some great storylines to go along with those teams as well. You look up at the top with the Oklahoma City Thunder, who are one of the youngest teams in the NBA, and are still making a push to finish as the 1 seed and trying to get Shea an MVP in the process. Right behind them with the Denver Nuggets, who are also trying to go ahead and get their guy in Jokic an MVP, and they're trying to repeat as NBA champions, looking more formidable than ever. The Minnesota Timberwolves have been one of the best teams in the West all season despite the cat injury recently. They're trying to stay afloat and still fight for that 1 seed as well. The Clippers have maybe the best chance in the Kawhi PG era to go out there and win a ring, partially because of the big-time addition of James Harden mid-season. You've got the Phoenix Suns, who are trying to figure things out behind their big three, the Sacramento Kings, who are still trying to make the Sabonis-De'Aaron Fox pairing work and get back into the playoffs this year, the Dallas Mavericks, being led right now by Luka Doncic, who's maybe playing the best individual basketball in the entire sport at the moment. He's trying to will them to a playoff spot, avoid the play-in. The Lakers are surging as of late. They're trying to make a late-season push to avoid the play-in too. And the Golden State Warriors, despite a lot of up and downs, aren't really out of it quite yet, and they've still got Steph Curry, so really anything's possible. There are so many great teams, and a lot of them have been talked about, but I'm sure as you noticed, I didn't mention one team in that top 10, and I feel like it's the team that pretty much never gets talked about amongst these 10 squads, and that team is, as I said at the beginning, the New Orleans Pelicans. This is especially strange because I feel like over the past few years, the Pelicans have been a pretty consistent topic of conversation. Like a couple years ago, they had one of the most interesting seasons out of anybody because they missed Zion the entire season, started off like 2-10 or something like that, and still found a way to go ahead and make the playoffs through the play-in, defeating the Clippers in that final play-in game, and they gave the Phoenix Suns a really tough first-round series. I think they pushed it to 6 games, and Brandon Ingram was a monster, putting up some ridiculous numbers and showing that he can be a playoff riser if the Pelicans get back to that spot. Last year felt like they were going to get back there. They were the 1 seed for a good majority of that beginning portion of the season, but then Zion got hurt, Ingram kept dealing with injuries, they plummeted down the standings in a really tough Western Conference, and ended up losing the play-in to the Oklahoma City Thunder just barely in a really fun close down to the wire game, partially because Zion didn't play with a still lingering injury, and this led to some discussion this offseason about them potentially trading a Zion or Brandon Ingram to get a top pick in this draft, maybe select Scoot Henderson, and rumors have been circling around Zion for a while, so there have been a lot of reasons why people should be talking about the New Orleans Pelicans. Even coming into this year, people were trying to predict, okay, where do all these teams in this insane Western Conference finish? The Pelicans were all up and down these projections. For me personally, I had them finishing outside the play-in just because I didn't know how they were going to do with injuries, although it's always felt like, hey, if they stay healthy, they could be one of the top teams in the West, and I did see a lot of people say this team is going to be top 5 in the West. I think they're going to get to that point, and it made sense. They're one of the hardest teams to project coming into the season with so many interesting storylines coming in. There, of course, constant looming threat of injuries for this squad, so they've been talked about a lot, but now that they're really good, nobody's really discussing that. I actually have already made a video this year talking about how nobody was talking about the Pelicans and how good they've been, and I went pretty in depth into the team then, but that was a few months ago, so let's talk about it again. Let's go over why the Pelicans are one of the better teams in the Western Conference and why it's insane nobody's actually discussing them, because they've been extremely impressive. One of the best things about them this season is that they've actually been relatively healthy. Zion and Ingram have only combined to miss about 17 games, which is a huge plus. Now, of course, you'd still like them on the court a little bit more if you could, but you're going to take what you can get if you're the Pelicans, and this has led them to a 39-25 record, 14 games above 500. They're sitting at the 5th spot in the Western Conference, 7-3 in their last 10, and they've got a 4-game win streak, which at the moment is the longest in the NBA. It's nice to finally see their stars out there on the court for a consistent period of time because they've always felt like they were capable of this, and now we're seeing it come to fruition in what is one of the better seasons in Pelicans history. That 38-25 record they're on has them on pace for about 50 wins, which would be their second best season ever, and the best since 2008 when Chris Paul was part of the New Orleans Hornets. So, as a Pelicans team, this may be the best team yet. They've got the 8th best offense in the NBA, the 6th best defense, making them one of only 4 teams joining OKC, Denver, and Boston with a top 10 rating in both, which is pretty commonly an indicator of great playoff success and even championship contention. And they've got the 4th best net rating in the entire NBA. They've been impressive on all fronts, especially if you take a look at what they've done away from New Orleans, because they've got the 2nd most road wins in the entire NBA this season, only behind the Minnesota Timberwolves. They've shown an ability to go into opposing arenas and get the job done, and that will be big in a potential first-round matchup because this team is going to have to go on the road for the first 2 games of a series, and if they can steal one, then things get really scary for the opposing squad. As you probably expect, the biggest contributors for them have been the typical guys, Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram, with honestly CJ McCollum having a fantastic season as well. But they haven't leaned as heavily on their top 2 guys as they have in the past. Like, you take a look at Zion's numbers in particular, he's putting up just 22.1 points per game, which is one of the lowest marks of his career, although it's still really good, shooting 57.7% from the field, shooting pretty well from 3, although Zion doesn't take many threes in general. But you can see he's taken a bit of a step back. He hasn't been his dominant volume scoring self, although he can definitely still get into that bag when they need him to. Instead, he's been a bit more of a facilitator and a play finisher, a connector, and that's been huge for his development and the growth of this team. Zion has been a revelation for the Pelicans. He's done a ton of ball handling for them throughout this season, and it's made them look really good. He's great at creating these advantages, starting up the offense. It's led to the highest assist mark of his entire career with 5.2, and he plays so well off of CJ, Brandon Ingram, and the plethora of shooters that the Pelicans have put around him. It's been a really fun experiment to watch, and one that's worked wonders. Brandon Ingram's in a similar boat, where he hasn't been this dominant statistical force, but he's been putting up really good numbers and still very capable of taking over when need be. 21.4 points per game, 5.1 rebounds, and 5.9 dimes, also the highest assist mark of his career, and he's shooting nearly 50% from the field and 36% from deep. You can see they've gone to this team-oriented approach this season with all their stars healthy, and it's worked for them. CJ McCollum is also a big part of this, having a great year, putting up 18.5 points per game, 4.3 rebounds, and 4.4 assists, while shooting a blistering 41.7% from 3 on a ton of attempts. He's been a high-level spot-up option, great at creating shots for himself and others, and the 3 of them just work really well as a trio. The supporting cast has also stepped up in a big way as well. Herb Jones, for example, has been unbelievable this season. Not only does he continue to be one of the best defenders in the world, very well should be on an all-defensive team, he's also giving them 11.3 points per game, which is a career high, and shooting 43.5% from deep, which is stellar, and that's a full 10% jump from last season. He has gone from basically a non-factor in the perimeter to a guy who pretty often is going to knock them down. The other night, he had I think 5 threes against the Raptors. Just, if you leave him open, he's really going to make you pay, and that was a strategy teams would try in the past, where they said, okay, if Herb beats us from the outside, he beats us, and maybe teams still do try that, but Herb has been extremely effective from out there. It's been really impressive, and doing that while playing this ridiculous defense, he does not get enough credit for how good he is. You've also got Trey Murphy out there in the wings too, a knockdown 3-point shooter as well, 14 points per game, while giving them some nice defensive and positional versatility. You've got Jordan Hawkins, who as a rookie is also a knockdown shooter, 37% from deep. Jonas Valanciunas is a really solid offensive big, still giving you 13.2 points per game and 9.5 rebounds, shooting 57% from the field and 35% from deep as well, so he's a threat from the outside too, as well as just being a force on the interior. I remember a Thunder game earlier in the season where he just annihilated us on the boards. Dyson Daniels off the bench is a really solid defensive guard to have. Jose Alvarado is still the gritty, feisty defender that he's always been, but now is shooting almost 36% from deep. Najee Marshall is a versatile forward, Larry Nance Jr. in the front court too. They've just done a really good job of putting a good supporting cast around their stars, specifically in terms of the 3-point shooting. This team is top 5 in 3-point shooting, and when you have that type of outside talent surrounding a threat on the interior like Zion Williamson and a mid-range talent like Brandon Ingram, who's also really good at getting himself to the basket, it makes you a really scary and versatile offense. Meanwhile, on the defensive end, they can also lock you down. Like I mentioned earlier, top 6 in defensive rating. A lot of that is Herb Jones, what he brings to the table as just a complete game breaker on the defensive end. You can put him on a number of different players at different positions. He pretty much always guards the opposing star and does a fantastic job. If someone's beating him, they're having to really work for their buckets. And I can say this firsthand again as a Thunder fan, he's always played some of the best defense on Shea out of anybody in the league. He's just extremely impressive. And then everybody else has really bought into this defensive scheme. I love what Willie Green has done with them over there. They've been one of the best two-way teams in the league, and pretty much everything indicates that this team can be a force in the playoffs, especially if Brandon Ingram levels up like we saw him do a few years ago against the Phoenix Suns in a playoff series. Zion, who hasn't been in the playoffs quite yet, if he locks in and continues to dominate in the ways that he has, this could be one of the scarier teams that a top seed could have to face in those playoffs. They're a complete team with some great depth, a guy who has already shown he can rise in the playoffs in Ingram, overall great star power, some experience, especially with CJ McCollum, who's been on a billion of these runs. I just like what the Pelicans have building a lot. I really wish more people would talk about them and how great they've been so far this season, but I guess that's why I'm in this space, to go ahead and talk about things that I want to talk about in the Pelicans. One of those teams I've really enjoyed watching this season. I've had a lot of fun watching the point Zion experiment, seeing what they've been doing with that front. And I just think they've got a great thing going over there. I love the team they built. If they go on a sneaky playoff run, you heard it here first, because I think it's entirely possible if matchups break their way. Again, it's just weird to me that the only coverage they really ever get is when people are like, oh, Zion is overweight, or this or that, or when is this team going to break up? When in reality, they're playing great basketball in the moment. We should be paying attention to that and celebrating how good they've been and the fact that they're finally healthy and showcasing what they probably could have done for years now if they just had better injury luck. With all that being said, though, those are my thoughts on the Pelicans. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. Drop down below in the comments what you think about this Pelicans team. Do you think they could go on a run in the playoffs if they make it in there, especially if they maintain this 5 spot? And what do you think they need to do? Who are the favorable matchups for them to try and go on a deeper playoff run? And say they disappoint in the first round. I'm not saying they're going to, but say it's not a great playoff series from them. Where do they go from here? You know, do they trade one of Ingram or Zion? Do they just kind of reshape the supporting cast, go for a third big time star next to those guys? Would love to hear your thoughts, because that has been a topic that's been circulating for a little bit. But for the moment, excited to see what they do the rest of the way. I appreciate y'all watching. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say it back.